just because we do have a couple big presentations ahead of us, and I don't want to drag this too far into the afternoon. The next talk, Yvonne Thyssen-Post is going to be giving this, and we had an original discussion around, looking at the feasibility of fresh pack operations. The obvious thing, you look in the store and you see the price per pound that growers are getting, either in direct sales or through the retailer, and it's certainly significantly more than if you're shipping direct to IQF processor. But there's certainly a lot of operational costs and fixed costs that anybody that's going into fresh pack or is in fresh pack realizes exist, and there's a lot of constraints. So Yvonne's put together a presentation looking at some of those benchmark costs and developing a tool to help growers work through their own costs, and look at ways to optimize profitability, hopefully, and maybe look at some other, if you're looking at developing a business plan, this could be a really helpful tool as well. So without spoiling all of her talk, I'm going to let Yvonne go ahead.
Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you for the opportunity to present this today. It's been, I think Peter had said at the beginning, it's been a 2-year process, and I guess it's a year. It's a year and a half. It'll be 2 years in June. So I will say I did a previous one on market, understanding the fresh market, which was really helpful for this because I thought I knew a fair bit about the blueberry industry, but I learned very quickly that I did not understand the fresh market. So I'm going to go through several slides first. Some of it will be repetitive of what's been said this morning, and I think that's good because we didn't make sure that our story was the same, but it seems to be the same, which is good. But I'm just going to quickly run through those pieces that are the same. So I'm assuming everybody can see my slides. So the project objectives, let's make sure that moves. Project objectives, as Peter mentioned, was to look at the economic feasibility or the return on investment of doing a model fresh pack, fresh frozen facility, because most people who do fresh pack also freeze whatever is not sold in a very short period of time, and also look at the risks that are associated with it. We've created a template that's to be used as a benchmark, hopefully for existing operations, but also a reference for anybody that's looking at it for future consideration. And initially we started off, I think, just looking at doing one model, which was under like up to 100,000 pounds. And then partway through we added model 2, which is up to 1 million pounds. So certainly that's a large difference between those two. But I think you'll see some of the significance with the two different models. So the project approach, I will say this one, and actually my previous project too, has been very different doing this under COVID. I normally like to be doing things in person, talking to people in person, and there hasn't been too much of that during this project. So Peter has been a tremendous resource with the Wild Blueberry Producers Association, and actually even when he was still with Perennia. His brother Todd Burgess, Glenmore Farms, was very gracious in sharing information. Betty Ann Hatt with Nova Agra Inc., which is a high bush blueberry processing, growing processing facility. But they also, there's similarities in how the product is processed. And she was willing to share lots of information, and I did do a tour there too. Perennia, Elaine Grant and Nancy Trigano, a lot on the food safety aspect. CFIA, Rebecca Follett. This was early on in the process that I got information from her. Internet research, spent a lot of time on there just trying to understand the process, and then reports and fact sheets, and a lot of as many as I possibly could get were price quotes from industry suppliers. And so that started early in 2020 and continued right up until February 2022. So, and as everyone knows, the prices, if you get a quote today, in a month's time, and actually some in these turbulent times, it's changed sometimes within a week. So when I go through the model, I'm going to indicate, some of the prices that are there and where they came from. So I don't think, I was trying to think of what do I call this slide, or what do I call the fresh fruit market grind, struggle, challenge. But I think to me, one of the things that I really learned in this project and in the previous one was how delicate that wild blueberry is, and even in comparison to the high bush blueberry. So we know that the quality is a challenge because it's got thin skin, it's very delicate, it's a lot of diversity, genetic diversity, because it's a wild berry. Also the growth habitat, like where it is growing and how it grows, how it's harvested. There was Travis made reference to the numerous harvest techniques that are used. And then the fact, I think too, the quality, the fact that it's dry sorted, it's unwashed. That means that the quality has to be, in many ways, pristine in order to maintain that appeal when it's packaged. Then the other thing that makes it really challenging is that in quantities, it limits the sales because we have that one pass harvest. You only have a short season of 4 to 6 weeks, and you have a short shelf life, unless you do something to try to extend the shelf life, or in the case when Travis referenced it this morning about making sure that you harvest under ideal conditions, and nazing the number of parameters that influence the quality. So that just, to me, that brings home the message that we just can't take this berry out of the field when we're ready to process it and be guaranteed that you're going to have a good quality product. So how do you maximize that potential for quality? And some of that was mentioned in Dr. Esau and Dr. Fork's talk this morning, and a lot of this information I did get from Peter Burgess. So field selection is absolutely critical. That's the first step. So you have to look at getting flat and mature fields, ones that have close to 100% coverage, are yielding between 4,000 to 6,000 pounds an acre. So less than 4, usually there's weed disease issues. Greater than 6,000, you're going to have dense canopies, and you'll have moisture issues, drooping of the fruit, which of course then can have quality issues. Plants between 4 to 10 inches tall, that's still actually a fair range. And then best management practices. So low weed pressure, from the talk we had this morning, the implications on the quality of bruising of the berries and split berries with weed pressure, disease management, high level of blueberry maggot and your spotted wing dorsal control, minimal wildlife population and activity, because the more of that there's around, the higher probability you're going to have some contamination with E. coli. And from what Peter's indicated, your total variable cost, usually from a management perspective, if you're going to have best management practices, should be between $1,500 and $1,800 per acre. So then other items, harvesting at a cooler temperature, and from the information that was presented this morning, less than 20 degrees, ideally. Use smaller lugs for transporting from the field. I know there was a comment made in the presentation this morning about even the color of them, or perhaps using wood, but I know that there's issues with that, with sanitizing, but certainly smaller lugs, because by compacting the berries, of course, you're creating damage. Minimize the handling and the jarring of berries, and yet the location of most of the fields don't allow that. Best management practices for sanitation and for hygiene, and that's all the way from the field all the way through to the fork. Remove the field heat, maintain a constant temperature, and in the report I do talk a fair bit about cooling of berries, and there is inconsistencies in what some of the research has shown. There is if you can't cool them and maintain that constant temperature, then perhaps you're better off not to cool them, because fluctuating temperatures. So if you cool them and then you take them and you park them in a non-ventilated area and let them sit there, then they're going to start to heat again. So if you can't maintain that constant temperature, you're going to start having the berries sweat. So again, that's another issue. Any sharp edges on equipment, it can damage the berries. Minimize the drop distance from when they're being taken from the lug and dropped onto the conveyor. Packaging, again, minimum depth, make sure that they're ventilated, and then distribute them in a very short time. So 36 hours is within 36 hours of harvest. So that just, that to me indicates the constraint that you have in putting the volume of product that you can put through the processing line in that short period of time, because it also has to be marketed within that short period of time. So what I have developed in a template is there's the two models, the up to 100,000 pounds and then up to 1 million pounds of product that is brought in to be processed. So processed, but not necessarily marketed. So I'm going to look at regulations, what's required in order to develop this model facility. And we say model in that it has to meet all the regulations so that I could ship blueberries wherever I wanted to ship them. And then, what's required from the market, regulatory, but there's other additional things that are required from the market, depending on who you're selling to. And then what's involved in actually processing. So this, to me, this is where I started this study. And I have to say that I felt like I was just going down a rabbit hole, and the rabbit hole was really, really deep, because what I thought I would find was a place where I could talk to one or two people, and it would tell me what I needed to develop in a facility. So what should my facility look like? What should be in there? The regulations, although they have improved with the Safe Food for Canada Act and the regulations, because they combine 14 different regulations, they don't say you are required to have a completely ventilated building with, air conditioning. You need to put a concrete footing. It does not say that. It stipulates outcomes from a food safety perspective. So looking at those and then trying to determine what regulations do I need to abide by. So I did spend a lot of time on this initially, and I'm still almost afraid that sometimes I miss something, but I'm going to go through this briefly. So licensing, if you're going to be grading, packaging, or labeling wild blueberries, you have to be a licensed facility to do that. And that's through CFIA. Food safety guidelines, which is what most of our regulations are now, to make sure that we have a safe product that is being sold to the consumer. So we have the Safe Food for Canada Act, Safe Food for Canada regulations, which most of those they're aligned with internationally recognized standards. Then we have the Food and Drug Act and regulations, which is controlled by CFIA and Health Canada. And then if you're just shipping product in Nova Scotia, you have provincial regulations under the Nova Scotia Fruit and Vegetable regulations that if you're only in Nova Scotia, they overrule the federal ones whenever there's discrepancies. So one of the things that to me was a very helpful resource in the Safe Food for Canadian regulations is what Prenny has put together in their booklet, Safe for Market. And there's 3 publications now, and I used most of the information, or all of the information, in the first one, because there's a number of checklists there. So it's saying, when it looks at premises, does your premise allow this outcome? And so I've included the checklists of that booklet in the appendices of my report. But I already mentioned the licensing. So to grade, package, and label food, you have to be licensed through CFIA. And we're talking model facilities. I realize that there are a number of growers that will package and process and package blueberries and sell them directly to consumers through their farm market or their roadside stand. There's probably, you're not abiding perhaps by all of the food safety guidelines. You don't have all of the licensing and regulations in place so that you could take that same product and sell it to a wholesaler or sell it to a restaurant. So this facility, both facilities that we're talking about have to meet all those guidelines. Okay, so then the preventative controls, so that's prerequisite programs that are there to help prevent food safety hazards. So they reduce the likelihood of contaminated product entering the market. Okay, and there's and then on top of that, you'll have your written standard operating practices, which is in your preventative control plan. So the key areas that are addressed in those checklists are indicated there. I'm not going to mention them all, but when I try to look at what needs to be included in this facility, it has to be able to be able to check off yes in all of those checklists, as that it has good rodent control because it has a concrete foundation, it has washable interiors, all of that has to be checked off. Then as the other thing that, so the preventative control plan, it documents practices. So that's your SOPs, and it records procedures. So if you're, when you're licensed and you have to have a preventative control plan, if there's any issues, first of all the employees have the training and know what the procedures are, but they also have the ability to go back and to say, yes, this was done. Then you also have traceability. So you're tracing your food forward at each step of the way, from the field all the way through until it's consumed. And typically in fresh berries, it's done with the labeling. So, and it's included there, what's included, what you need to have in the labeling. So common name, net quantity, business name and location, grade, and then a lot code. And a lot code, each grower may create their own, but it's typically somehow related to the field identification, but it also, and then also date, something so that you can go back and say that if it's that code, I know exactly where that product came from. And then Canada number 1, that's the grade for blueberries, wild blueberries. And there's a general tolerance of defects of 3% if you're selling federally, or sorry, across the provinces or internationally. If it's just within the province, there's an additional 5% tolerance of defects, so 8%. Canada number 1 basically is defined that you have to have fairly uniform in size, well colored, properly packaged, dry and safe, free from green berries, leaves, stems, dirt, or other foreign material, apparently free from insects, insect larvae, or diseases, and free from any other damage or defect. That's the description for Canada number 1. So the thing to remember is that, to me, I would look at that you go to the general tolerance of defects, that's federal, so 3%, so that then you can still sell irregardless of where you're selling. Okay. So the other thing, the grading, the product package, it has to be in the Canada number 1. It does say it has to be securely closed. And there can't be it says no staining, soiled, warped, broken, or otherwise damaged. So that, again, that's a challenge if the blueberries are damaged in any way, because the first thing they do, of course, will be to bleed if they're fresh product. And then some retailers also have specify the program that you have to comply with, like Loblaws has Canada Gap. And so you have to know that if you're selling in that wholesale retail market. And then, of course, if you're exporting, a lot of the standards are cross compliance, but you need to know what the standards are for the country that you are designating to. And then there's the GFSI certification, which is fairly good for almost every country, but you do need to check if you're going to be sent it to a country. One of the areas that's always different is the labeling. Because quite often you have to, there's specifications, but you also have to, if it's a language difference, you also have to provide their language, the country's language, as well as sometimes as well as English. So when you're preparing a product for the fresh market, what's really involved in the cleaning facility? So in order to comply with a lot of those regulations that are all of them, what I have mentioned, you're going to bring the bins in, they have to be weighed and tagged. That's so that you can follow through on shrinkage, but also the tagging is for identifying so that you can do that traceability. Ideally, you're pre-cooling the berries. And then you dispense the berries onto a conveyor belt, and there's an air blower in the cleaning line that will remove some of the debris. Then there's a tilt belt, which gets rid of clusters and also some softs. A graded belt, which is a sizer that gets rid of the smaller berries. And then there's a conveyor belt where typically there are people that are removing anything that's been missed by the previous part of the processing line. Then it's weighed into the packaging, and then you put it into a cooler, ideally, if it's going to be sitting around, and then it's distributed. So that's the process, and that really doesn't, the only thing that will vary in the model number 2, which is the bigger one, is that we're going to use the color and the soft sorter, which is mechanical, to reduce some or take out some of the product that are issues electronically rather than having labor force. So we have these are hypothetical examples, and I sort of struggle with that part because it's really hard to figure out what it's going to cost you to put a building up, because these are model facilities, when I don't know where I'm going to put it. So I've done work with engineers in the past, and I know that, site is a big factor on what your costs are going to be. So these are not site specific. So I'm making assumptions on the markets, that the markets are there. And that's not a good assumption. Okay, I always tell people when I do business planning, don't assume the market's there. Actually find the market first. But then the market wants a sample of your product, right? So I'm making assumptions that it's there. I'm making assumptions on price based on the study that I did 2 years ago. And then I'm going to go through the parameters that you need to consider. But I want people to realize that this is just to give you an overview of what things to consider, but the template allows you to put your own numbers in. And to me, that's the most important piece, is that understand how it works, but then you need to get your numbers for your site, for your business. So what I consider is investment, what's required in the layout of the infrastructure, and I'm assuming we're building this from scratch. So there'll be many of you, and we're going to talk about this at the end, that will say, well, we can't afford to do that. Then even if you take an existing building, it's how do you make that building comply with the regulations that are there. So we're looking at the investment, that's what's required. Then we're going to look at the financing, when you lease something or if you buy it, and then including operations, looking at labor, operating, sales, and then sales and marketing. And then I'm going to look at return on investment, was the initial request from the RFP. I also look at, sorry, I'm drawing a blank. The average pounds, the number of pounds you need to produce in order to break even. So break even analysis. And I also looked at the price that you need to get in order to break even. So again, these are with the numbers that I have used. You need to use your own numbers, but this will give you the tool to be able to do that. So now I'm going to try to click on this and hope that it takes me, look at that. Amazing. So everyone can still see, you can still see.
No, I think you're going to have to share the new link.
Okay, then just let me go. I got a new share.
Yeah, we're good there.
Okay. Okay. So this is just, I'm going to try to walk you through this and cover, I'm going to focus on model number 1, which is less than 100,000 pounds because, or up to 100,000 pounds, that there are certainly more people that are in that category in this province, and there's a few that are at the 1 million pounds. So the process, the way the template works is exactly the same for both models. It's just you're going to be entering different data. So this, on the first page, there's just some instructions as to how to use it. The key thing to remember is anything that's green, you can change. If it's white, it's tabulated, calculated. And so eventually when the intent is that this template will be available. I'm assuming Peter posted on the WBPAN's website.
Absolutely.
And then, so everything will be protected so that you can't manipulate those, the calculated sheets, but you can enter anything that's green. Okay, so in this case, and a lot of the information that I have used in the model 1 is thanks to Glenmore Farms, because they shared a lot of their operating costs with me for 3 years. I did analysis on averaging and also on their previous facility that they owned. So trying to figure out what the size should be, and then looking at what the cost should be. And I'm sure, well, actually, I'm fairly positive that in today's world, those numbers aren't high enough, because everybody knows the price of lumber has, is still high, and everything continues to go up. And if we continue to have the situation that we have with Russia and Ukraine, I'm sure that a number of these things will change. But you can put in the size here. You can also put in the dollars per square foot. I would encourage you to, if you're going to actually pursue this, you need to get a building design done by a professional engineer, and you need to have costing done. That would give you a comfort level, and site specific, because there can be huge differences in sites. So there's a place here I'm including the building, an insulated building, so that you can have total control of the environment in there, and you can cool the berries. So with an HVAC system, power and water, and that can vary huge on any facility. I am saying to have a freezer, a walk-in freezer on site, and I know most smaller growers don't have that. However, one of the things that I know is that you rent some freezer space, and that's probably minimal cost, but driving back and forth to pick it up on a regular basis, nobody ever calculates that cost. And that is part of your costs. Okay. I also have a walk-in cooler as one of the infrastructures. So you can see what is included. So that's your total building cost is $534. So then in a processing equipment, we have 3 lines. These were quoted by, these were done early, I think by Maine Blueberry equipment. So this is the cost per unit on the exchange of 1.28 at the time when I did this. Shipping and installation, of course, that will vary. In this case, we don't have a color or a soft sorter. There isn't in the template. I could actually purchase or rent one if I wanted to, but for this small scale, it's certainly not warranted. Then you need a floor scale of some sort that when you bring the blueberries in, that you can weigh them. A pressure washer, primarily for cleaning the facility. I know there's some issues in you can't use a pressure washer for cleaning the equipment. But the facility itself and the floors, stacking totes, most of these were all quoted. Robar in Spring Hill for the stacking quotes, and plastic buckets just for waste, rubber mats basically for people to stand on that are standing at the cleaning line. And then in a lot of these, I put a miscellaneous of $1,000. And again, you can take that out if you don't think there's going to be miscellaneous, but $1,000 in this size of an operation, it's minimal. pallet jacks to move the product around, and there's two of them, because I don't want cross contamination. So I bring in clean product or dirty product, sorry, and then clean product on the other end. Wooden pallets to handle the lugs that are when they're coming in. Aluminum step ladders, aluminum racks for the product packaging, and then something to deliver. And I know most smaller ones would probably just use styrofoam coolers in a half-ton truck or whatever. I'm proposing that you rent 2 reefer cube vans. Again, if you're going to cool the product, you got to maintain that quality, that temperature all the way through. So for this one, the numbers I've used, it gives a total investment of $631,980. How are you going to finance that? That's the next tab. So this automatically tabulates from the previous page. Then in the green one, how much money are you going to put down? I put 10% because most lenders will require at least that, but that depends on your financial position, your level of equity, because many people use equity for a down payment. And so I'm financing the difference. In this case, I said at 5.5% interest at over 20 years. Okay, again, you can change this. You can break into 2 loans, pay one off short for a longer term, have a short term or a longer term amortization. And then this is a little table that calculates the depreciation based on the type of equipment. And that it's calculated automatically from what I entered on the investment page. Operating. This is interesting. So what I've done in this is a production part. So the capacity of the cleaning lines. One of the things that I found out very early is that if you look at the specs for the equipment, the equipment that I had quoted from Maine, 600 pounds an hour. And when I checked with different growers, they said, there's no way, like it's 150 to maybe 200 at the best. So I used 150. Again, I would caution you, when you look just at the specs of equipment, your throughput is not going to be what it says, especially with wild blueberries, because you have a lot, I was going to say dirty product, but you have a lot of additional items besides firm, ripe blueberries coming in. So this is what you have the ability here to have as many, you can put up to 4 lines, what the capacity is, how many hours a day you're going to run. And then so that 1,500 is calculated, and how many days a week. And originally when I did this, I had it running at 6 days a week. And then Peter said to me, which is fairly believable, that when you only have a 4-week period, you got to run every day that you possibly can. So it's at 7 days a week. It calculates the amount that it's processed. How many weeks are we running? 4 weeks. And then shrinkage. And there is some reference this morning made to the percentage of waste that you have going through and how you can improve that. I have it at 25%. And I think that's just averaged. If you're at, and that depends on the year, the weather, when you're harvesting. I know last summer, Nova Agri told me that they didn't harvest half of their crop because it was just, when it was ready, it was hot and humid, and they could not, the quality that they would have taken off of the vine was just, it wasn't worth what they would have lost going through the processing. So you can change that and see the impact. We also have an area where I've done some variability analysis. Labor, a big part in this system. How many staff do you need per shift? So how many hours are they working? That's based on the information up above, per week. And how many staff hours per day? That's a maximum. And then the labor that's required. And this is all calculated based on $17 an hour. Then there's also some allowance for operations that somebody, although I know in family businesses, you're not typically paid for your time. This is calculating that you're paid for your time. Okay, and it's based on when you deliver, you're paid for your time. And if you're managing or a foreman on site, you're paid for your time. So this number to me is almost startling. 100,000 pounds, and it's 101,982. And I'm actually fairly comfortable that this number is pretty close to right. Then vehicles, are you delivering them? And if you're going to, in this case, be rented to a vehicle, so that I have costs in for what the capacity is. And again, you need to confirm that. And then what it's going to cost you. I have in here $800 an hour, a week, sorry, to rent it. And then what the fuel is. And from the time I started this to now, and I'm sure this number is wrong, $1.90 per liter of fuel. I think when I started it, I was at $1.50 something. And then as the weeks changed and I was tweaking it, I kept changing it. So but this template allows you to do this. And it's all based on how far you have to, your average distance that you're delivering. Then we look at operating. So in this scenario, I'm taking in 126,000 pounds of blueberries. The cost is, so that's cost of goods sold. And I use the 10-year average, which is 55 cents a pound. And then I put in a 5 cent a pound inconvenience factor, which was on recommendation of what Peter had said to me. So you're paying 60 cents a pound for the product that's coming in. Okay. Wholesale and direct. And this was based on a split similar to what Glenmore would do on I was going to say an optimum year, but you cannot sell 100,000 pounds direct to consumers in most cases, in that short 4-week period. So I based it on a 60-40 split. Then also looked at the packaging. And I know I had Peter Chapman had a discussion with him earlier, and he said, well, the 5 and the 10 pound box, which he's probably going to tell you is not a good scenario. I'm using what you currently are using. You can change all of this. So if you're looking at a 1 pound box, or you're looking at a pint, you can change that. You just have to know what your packaging cost is. And these packaging that I have here was some maritime paper, and it's for the EnviroShield. I don't have a sorter. I could, in the Model 2, I'm actually leasing that. So I'm going to put the price in there, but unless I'm leasing it, I don't include it in this model. And then looking at, so this is calculated for the equipment vehicle is included here. Then I'm looking at utilities. What's it going to cost to operate this for the 4 to 6 week period? Most of this information was extrapolated from Glenmore's farms 3 years of average data. Again, if you're an existing operation, you would have that information. If it's a new one, then this would be a base for you to start with. Then I look at overhead. So I have administration, and again, this is putting in costs, insurance, excluding the vehicle. Depreciation is calculated, which you saw before. And then property taxes, you should know what your property taxes is. I'm guessing they're at $1,500. Interest is calculated based on my financing. And then how did I sell it? So 5 pound boxes, wholesale was $12.50, direct was $17.50. And some of this information was taken from my initial study that I did 2 years ago, where they said the direct marketers were saying between $15 and $20 a pound for 5 pound. So I took the medium. Okay, so again, if you have different prices, then you can change that. So basically it's saying your cost, your total cost, you can see here, and my net income is negative. Okay, so with 100,000 pounds coming in, I'm going to go to the summary page. So there's a summary of each one of the models. So basically my mix at the top to 60-40, my sales of 100, I brought in 126,000 pounds. I marketed 94,500 on my 25% shrinkage. And then these are your costs, which are in that template showing that you have a net loss of $43,000. My investment, this is just a summary of the previous ones. So that shows with a negative net income, I have a return a negative 6.9 return on investment. So that's saying, well, because it's negative net income for everything that I've invested, I'm losing money. And then I also did a calculation on the bottom, the production that you need to break even under these numbers is 218,402 pounds, and the price would be $3.35 on average per pound. And the price here is $2.89 average per pound. So the other, the other thing that I added on, I guess, Peter, since you and I were talking, I did a variability analysis, and I'll review this a little bit more. So it basically says what happens if my shrinkage improves to 20%, or if it gets worse. Okay, so then what are your sales going to be? What are your expenses? And what's your net income? What's your return on investment? I also looked at what happens if I'm paying less for the product that comes in, or I'm paying more. What's my effect? And then I also looked at the effect of field price and shrinkage, both of them, on my net income. So if the price changes, or if my percent shrinkage changes, and then another scenario where the field price and the shrinkage, what effect will have on the return on investment. That is, again, that's calculated from everything that you entered in the previous pages. So I'm just going to flip to number 2.
I have about 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, I know. I'm running out of time, and I said I wasn't going to use all my time. Okay, model 2. I just want to quickly run through this because this certainly applies to fewer people. 97% wholesale, 3% direct, and the investment or the processing over £1 million, 25% shrinkage, and so the total sales. And the numbers, the price that I was getting is the same as in model 1. So basically what this shows is that if I'm processing that amount, I actually have a return on investment of 39.65%, which sounds almost too good to be true. And I know that I'm not as confident with this one that I have my costs high enough. You know, for freezer capacity, it has to be adjusted to what you have for throughput. So again, you can add this, you can put this information in the template and run it through. So I'm just want to, I'm going to flip back, I think, to my, yeah. I want to go back to this if I can. Everybody sees the back to the template?
Yep.
Okay, so just a couple more slides on, so the feasibility analysis, I already went through that. Just on model 2, I wanted to show you basically what happens if you do that little chart that I showed from model 1. So again, the same thing. If you have increased shrinkage, your return on investment, of course, is less. And there's a couple of other slides that I'm just going to flip through because it's also the field price, the effect on field price and net income, same thing. And that template allows you to do that. So in conclusion, to me, there's a number, like in order to make this feasible, the product quality is key. The shrinkage, you can see in the analysis, the effect that has, if it increases to 30%, if it increases to 40%. Labor is huge, and you're going to have to pay the $17 an hour to get somebody to come in a smaller operation for 4 weeks, 5 weeks. Throughput, the more you can put through, you can see that in the 1 million pound to the 100,000 pound difference. And then overhead costs with 4 weeks, it's really difficult to justify this with 4 weeks of operation. Some people will use an existing building, again, modifying that so that it meets the standards that you have to. You can use used equipment. My prices were all for new. Trying to find additional uses for that building, extending the season, doing other crops, which some of our larger growers are doing. And then the other thing is a collaborative effort. So it's kind of similar to what Scotia Gold does with apples. Again, that quality issue, I think, is going to be a huge factor in doing a collaborative effort. And you still only have 4 weeks. So you'd then have to do the mechanization, I think. The other thing that I think we have to be aware of is when you're up to that £1 million or well over that 200,000 or 250, you're selling it more into the wholesale market, and there's no guarantees. People will say, I'm going to sell to the wholesalers, I get a contract. My understanding is they certainly have not done contracts in years, and they won't do that. So you're selling a larger volume, you're relying on wholesalers, and you are more a price taker again, not a price setter, which I think is one of the reasons why some have gone into the fresh market, was so that they can have more control over the price. So with no guarantees on market, you continually have to work on securing that. But it also means you've got your investment. Once you've made your investment in the overhead, then you've got increased risk. So that's, look at that, I finished 2 meetings before. So that's all that I have, Peter. I would like to leave some time for questions. I got to stop the share, I take it.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and obviously there's ways you can tweak that. You know, I think when we talked through this, we talked about running that 10 hours a day. If you wanted to increase throughput, you could go to 2 10-hour shifts and run the facility 24/7, which I know we had done in the past, and it absolutely allowed us to up our throughput. Certainly decreased the amount of sleep we got as well. But you know, that certainly might change the formula in that short season. But anybody has some comments or questions?